Hello, college football fans, and welcome once again to the SEC. Yesterday and today, I'm your host, Bert LaCroix, and this will be episode number 20 in our podcast series. We're glad you're here at the halfway point of the Southeastern Conference season for the year 2018. Yes, we have played 6 games, and I think the wheat is beginning to separate itself from the chaff, if we want to look at it that way. Things are settling in where you would expect things to be at this point. It looks to me, from taking a glance at the standings, that things could very well end the same way they are now. If I were to have to predict, and anybody's prediction is as good as mine, but if I would have to predict, I think the season's end will play out very closely to what we see at the halfway point here in early October, almost mid-October by the time we play Saturday, the 13th. We've got, 6 games on tap. 12 teams are playing. 2 teams have a bye week. Those 2 teams that are not playing this week are the Kentucky Wildcats and the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Now, let's take a look at the games that are about to be played. We're going to talk a little bit about the series history, and we're going to talk about the game coming up with predictions against the line and straight up. But before we do, let's take a look at those standings I mentioned just a few moments ago. And you'll see what I mean by how things just might end the way they appear today. We'll start with the East. You've got the Georgia Bulldogs with a 4-0 record at number 1. Kentucky has a 3-1 record at number 2, tied with Florida, who is 3-1. But if push came to shove there, the Wildcats did defeat the Gators in Gainesville, so they do have an edge up. They should be placed at number 2. The South Carolina Gamecocks come in 4th in the East with a 2-2 record. The Missouri Tigers, the Tennessee Volunteers, and the Vanderbilt Commodores all are winless in the conference with 0-2 records. So you go Georgia, Kentucky, Florida, South Carolina, Missouri, Tennessee, Vanderbilt. That's the way I would expect it to end come late November, early December. Now, what we do have is a couple of challengers to the Georgia Bulldogs. That was the biggest mystery, I think, before the season, if anyone would challenge, possibly even just for second place. We really didn't know if there would be anybody that could contend against Georgia for first place. But if there are 2 teams, it is shaken down to Kentucky and Florida. Now, neither team has played Georgia yet, so all of that is ahead of us. Kentucky plays Georgia, I do believe, on November 3rd in Lexington. And the Florida Gators, of course, play the Georgia Bulldogs October 27th in Jacksonville, Florida, the world's largest cocktail party. That official moniker or unofficial moniker has been removed from the title, but that's what it is. That's what it will always be known as. And down there in Jacksonville at the Gator Bowl, Georgia and Florida on the 27th of October. So either one of those teams, if they beat Georgia, we'd really have us a race in the SEC East. It could happen. I don't expect it to, but we're going to find out a lot more about Georgia this week as they travel to Baton Rouge to play the LSU Tigers. That should be a lot of fun. It's the feature game on CBS at 3:30 Eastern, and it should be a Donnybrook, I do believe. Let's go to the West. And again, about like you would expect it to end in late November. Alabama, of course, number 1 with a 3-0 conference record. LSU and Texas A&M come in at number 2 and 3. They're tied. They have not played each other. And so when they do play each other, we're going to have one of those teams possibly bounce to the number 2 spot while the other drops to number 3. We don't know, but again, that's a big possibility. And those 2 teams play the last game of the season in College Station this year. So there's going to be a lot of exciting things going on Rivalry Week, November 24th. Let's move to the 4th slot, tied for 4th and 5th in the SEC West. Mississippi State and Auburn both have 1 and 2 conference records. And Mississippi State, of course, gets the nod ahead of Auburn as they defeated the Tigers last week. I'd rather not talk about it, but it happened. And finally, I have enough gumption, enough wherewithal to be able to talk about it, but it was miserable. You know that. I know that. As Bob Dole would say, the American people know that. It was obvious to all. A very unfortunate thing if you're one of us Auburn Tigers, but that's the way it goes at this point in the season. Now, in the last two spots, we have Arkansas with an 0-3 record and Ole Miss with a 0-2 record, bringing up the rear in the SEC West. Those two teams will battle in Arkansas this weekend. That'll settle that issue. So let's get right down to it and start with that football game. The Ole Miss Rebels travel to Arkansas. Ole Miss is a 7-point favorite over the Razorbacks. In the series history, Arkansas leads. The teams have played each other more than you might think over the years. They played long before, being natural rivals to some degree. They played many years before Arkansas joined the SEC in 1992 and joined the West, so they play Ole Miss on every year. But Arkansas leads the series, 36 wins for Arkansas, 28 for Ole Miss, and one game has ended in a tie. Now, the largest margin of victory in the series for the Razorbacks was 44-8 in 2007, so since they joined the SEC 11 years ago. And 28-0 is Ole Miss's largest margin of victory, and that happened back in 1953, around the real heyday of Ole Miss football. The longest winning streak in the series, Ole Miss Ole Miss won 6 games between the years 1958 through 1970. They did not play regularly back then, with Arkansas, of course, being in the Southwest Conference, but Ole Miss did pick up 6 wins between the years 1958 through 1970. And Arkansas's 5-game winning streak, their longest in the series, occurred the years 1985 through 1989. Again, before Arkansas was a member of the Southeastern Conference and the West Division. And so what do we have in this game? We have an improving Arkansas team, a team that was able to put up 31 points and probably could have put up more on the University of Alabama, winning 65-31. So Arkansas, against Auburn, they were sloppy, but Auburn's offense obviously didn't do anything much. That was one of the first games that Auburn did not rush for 100 yards. They have not rushed for 100 in their last 3 games. Well, but more on Auburn later. That was really the beginning of the downward spiral. As Auburn, it appears to go, well, okay. I got started on it. I'll have to hush. Stick to Ole Miss and Arkansas and talk about that game, which is going to be played on Saturday night. The last game of the night at 7:30 Eastern Time. Okay, Ole Miss is favored, as I mentioned, by 7. Arkansas is improving. I also spoke to that fact. It should be a pretty good ball game. The 7 points could be a good barometer of where the final margin might land. But be not mistaken, folks, the Razorbacks could win this football game. They had to gain some confidence by scoring 31 against Alabama. And they didn't allow Auburn to do a whole lot. They defeated Kent State in the meantime. So I expect them to put up a ball game and for it to go 4 quarters. But the Arkansas defense still is not great. Ole Miss's offense is prolific. And I do expect the Rebels to come out on top. As far as if they will cover or not, I'll say yes. Ole Miss defeats Arkansas and covers the 7 points. But this is one I would not touch if I were a gambling man, as the Razorbacks could pull the mild upset. And we'll move on down the line to Texas A&M at South Carolina. Texas A&M is a 2.5 favorite. These teams have only played 4 times, and all of those have occurred since Texas A&M joined the conference in 2012. A&M leads the series again, 4-0. The largest margin of victory, of course, had to occur within the last 6 years. It did in 2014 as the Aggies defeated South Carolina, 52-28 in that year. The Gamecocks haven't won a game, so they don't have a winning streak or a largest margin of victory, obviously. And by the way, that streak for Texas A&M began that year in 2014 with a 52-28 victory over the Gamecocks, and it ran through 2017. Here we have the 5th game being played this Saturday in Columbia, South Carolina, I do believe. And yes, that is correct. I think you got another barn burner, and the betting line reflects that. Again, the Aggies being a 2.5 favorite. Now, the Aggies are playing defense. That's something we talk about in our preseason podcast. The Texas A&M should be a good offense, with Jimbo being really an offensive mastermind. And they have had a good offense. I don't know if it's as good as we expect. Kellen Mond has done some good things. They've been able to run the ball a little bit, and they've also been able to play some defense. So this game might be a little more defensive than one would expect it before the season started. South Carolina's offense still struggling, and Jake Bentley going down. They've had to have a replacement quarterback, and it's going to be a tough game for them to win in Columbia. But it is in Columbia, so I would give them more than a fighting chance. Another barn burner, Texas A&M and South Carolina. I'm looking at my notes here, and I have USCE. That means University of South Carolina East, USC East, USC West being Southern Cal Trojans. So again, I stumble when I speak of the South Carolina Gamecocks with the Southern Cal Trojans in the back of my mind. But they're about as east as you can get on the coast, not on the coast, but near the coast of South Carolina. Blah, blah, blah. Let's get down to a pick. I am going to pick Texas A&M to win and to cover over South Carolina on Saturday. The game is being played at 3:30 p.m. also, so we'll see what happens there. That game up against the Georgia and LSU game. But Jimbo's done a good job, a credible job, more so in SEC play, his first head coaching stint in the conference. And Saturday should be a good one. Now we go to Florida Gators and Vanderbilt Commodores. They're playing each other in Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, Nash Vegas, Florida, another 7-point favorite in SEC play. The Gators looking good last week. You've really got to give the Gators credit for being able to take on the LSU Tigers and defeat them in Gainesville. LSU was a favorite, but Florida came out on top and handed the Tigers their first conference loss, their first loss at all in the 2018 season. So congratulations to Dan Mullen and his staff and team and fans down there in Gainesville and the Swamp. They're doing very well, and they bring a lot of confidence into this game with Vanderbilt. And I don't think there's any doubt they should go up to Nashville and win. I think that's what most of you out there would expect, and I do. Now, before we make a prediction, let's look at the series history there. These two teams, being in the East, have played each other regularly for many years, at least since 1992, but also a few years before that. The Gators lead the series 39-10, and two have ended in a tie. The largest margin of victory, Florida's largest margin of victory, came in 2001. 71-13. The Gators romped over the Vanderbilt Commodores. That was Steve Spurrier's last year, by the way, and we always like to refer back to Auburn. They came into Auburn undefeated number one in October and lost a game in the misting rain with a Damon Duval field goal at the very end to upset the number one Gators. What a wonderful night it was on the Plains, always getting in a plug for the Tigers wherever I can. And that's what it comes from being a homer. And I'm unashamedly a homer. Again, we give opinions on this podcast, and in the columns I write for Sports Hacks, you can find reviews of games, and you can find write-ups on the games that's going to tell you about stats and this and so forth. And we don't, if you do a column for Sports Hacks, you don't do it like that. You write your opinion. The motto is on Sports Hacks, what is it? The brightest opinion, the best opinions from the brightest minds in sports, or something like that. I wouldn't give me, or, well, I can't speak for everybody else, that much credit, but it's a good moniker and a good slogan. And that's what we do. We give opinions at Sports Hacks, and my opinion on this game will come shortly. Gators again, 71-13 in 2001. Steve Spurrier's last year, Vanderbilt's largest margin of victory was 20-0 in 1946. The longest winning streaks, 22 games for the Gators between 1989 and 2012. A 22-game winning streak for Florida. Vanderbilt won 3 games between the years 1945 and 1949. And on to the game pick, I would expect Florida to be able to score at least in the 20s, maybe the 30s, and surpassed the 7-point spread. Vanderbilt can play tough. They've proven that. They've won 3 ball games this year, and they're struggling to get up bowl eligible, but it's going to be tough for them to add another one in the win column on Saturday. Florida to win and to cover at Nashville against the Vanderbilt Commodores. Now, Missouri and Alabama. Bama number 1 in the conference. Bama number 1 in the nation. Tua's dinged up. We don't know how that's going to affect it. I don't know if it would affect it much at all. Alabama's a 28-point favorite. They should be. Again, as I mentioned last week, Alabama is a juggernaut. This series has only been played 5 times in the history of these two college football traditions. Bama holds the edge 3-2 over Missouri, and they were both in streaks. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. Well, Missouri won in 1968 and 1975, and Alabama has won since between the years 1978 and 2014. And if you'll remember, they played Missouri in the SEC championship a few years ago and throttled them pretty handily. I believe that might have been in 2014, the last time the two teams played each other. The largest margin of victory for Alabama was 42-10 in 2012. And Missouri's largest margin of victory came in 1968 at 35-10 in the Gator Bowl in 1968. Missouri also defeated Alabama in the opening game of the 1975 season. I remember that. Bama had been on a roll since 1971, since they installed the wishbone attack. Bear Bryant getting that from Darrell Royal at Texas. And it was the beginning in 1971 of complete dominance for the Tide in the 70s. And in 1975, Bama comes into the game favored. First game of the season, a television game. I think Missouri got out to a 20-0 to lead and never looked back. It was like 20-7. I'll go back and check the score for you. But Missouri winning that particular game before the two teams picked up Southeastern Conference play in the year 2012. Bama, a 28-point favorite. I don't think you're going to debate much about Alabama winning this football game or who's going to win the football game. I predict Alabama, and I predict them to win big. Now, will they cover the spread? 28 points. Well, boy, the spread, I sneaked out on this one. I took, in my Yahoo pick'ems that we do, I picked Alabama. I picked Arkansas to cover the 35. Well, they got beat by 34, and it was back and forth, if you remember, at the game. So that's one way to get really interested in the game. I didn't have any money on it, but I do like to pick against the spread in the Yahoo Pick'em for fun. But there's about 14 or 15 of us in that Yahoo Pick'em, and each person throws in $10 before the season. So the winner will come out with like $150, $140 minus the 10 that you put in. And Melody and I, my wife Melody, and I both tied for the first slot last year. We were lucky, so we were able to pocket that money and use it for I used it for the bowl game, which I wish I hadn't attended, Auburn and Central Florida. So there you are. You had it. Alabama, will they cover? You got to think Alabama's going to score at least in the 40s. How many will Missouri and Drew Lock with Derek Dooley as the offensive coordinator score on the Crimson Tide? That's the big question. You would think they could score as much as Arkansas. Arkansas getting 31 on Alabama. And, of course, Alabama is always picking up some defensive touchdowns and some scooping scores and stuff like that. The ball is bouncing that way, as well as them having all of that talent and that great coaching over in Tuscaloosa. But I would not touch this one since, looking back at Arkansas scoring 31, Bama might score 50, but Missouri could score 31. That would be a 29-point margin. So you see where this one is? This one's really right on the bubble, I think, just like the Arkansas. If push came to shove and you had to pick a winner against the spread, I'd take the Tide because, how many times you're going to go wrong if you do? I don't have the statistics on that, but we could look them up and find out how Alabama's covering over the last few games and the last couple of years, actually. But Alabama to win, if you had to pick a cover, I'd pick Alabama. They certainly will defeat Missouri. And the big story this week has been Dixieland Delight coming back to Alabama. Alabama, again, does have an injury to Tua. And so I'd be more worried. If I was Alabama, I'd be a little bit more worried about Alabama than I would be about singing Dixieland Delight and what lyrics will be used. But anyway, college football, everything's on a 24/7 cycle. Noise, 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 media, 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 blah, blah, blah. You got to tune into what you like and shut out all the rest. Bama, of course, over Missouri. And we get down to our next to the last game. I don't always, but I'm holding Auburn to the last. But let's go to the most important game in the SEC this week, in my way of thinking. And again, it holds that feature slot on CBS at 3:30. The Georgia Bulldogs travel to LSU, to the Red Stick, to take on the LSU Tigers. LSU, that tiger is wounded. Mike is going to be growling. Another 7-point favorite we have here. Georgia, a 7-point favorite over LSU. The series history stands like this. LSU leads the series 16-13-1. Exactly 30 games played in the history of Georgia versus LSU. The largest margin of victory came in 2004, Nick Saban's last year down in Baton Rouge. But Georgia won that game in Athens, 45-16. They pummeled LSU, one of the Tigers' 2 losses in 2004 during the regular season. They also lost, here we go, to Auburn 10-9, and that was probably the game at Jordan-Hare Stadium that really helped propel them to an undefeated season and a national championship. Yep, in my mind they were. Of course, you know about the Oklahoma and Southern Cal story, whatever. Auburn was a champion that year with a 13-0 record. The LSU, a big one in that series. Back to the game at hand, Bird. The longest winning, LSU's largest margin of victory was 47-7 in 1936. Been a long time since the Bengal Tigers had beat the crap out of Georgia, but that was in 1936. Again, 47-7. The longest winning streaks, Georgia 3 games from 1947 through 1949. LSU had a 7-game winning streak. You have to go back from 1928 intermittently through the year 1945 to find LSU with 7 wins. Now, who's going to win? Who's going to lose? LSU could win the ball game. I would not take Georgia minus the points. Would I take LSU the 7? I'd say it like I did against Alabama. If I had to take one, I'd take LSU in the 7. But Georgia could win the game by 10 points, 10 to 14 points. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I'm going with Georgia to win, but LSU to cover. And that's a shaky cover. It's not one that I would say emphatically. But you're looking at a score somewhere in the neighborhood of probably 21-17 for Georgia, maybe 24-20. I don't know. But again, an upset could be in the making down in Baton Rouge. It's going to be a lot of fun. And the final game, we got to talk some more about my Auburn Tigers. It's been hard to get any enthusiasm going, to generate any excitement here at 116 Sundown Way in Ackworth, Georgia, because Auburn is headed south, and if they don't turn it around this Saturday, it's going to be a miserable season, not undifferent from the 2012 season. I don't think it'll go there. Oh, God, I hope it does not go there. But Auburn's got to turn it around, and the seniors are going to have to step up. The coaches are going to have to coach them up. The players are going to have to get busy on their fundamentals, their attitude, and get out there and get after Tennessee, because Tennessee is going to come down to Auburn with every intention of winning the game and with the belief that they can win this football game. And yes, they can, ladies and gentlemen. And if you've watched Auburn the last 3 or 4 weeks, heck, all season, you'll know that they can. Ole Miss improving a little bit, I think, under Jeremy Pruitt. And the Tigers had better hitch up good and get their helmets screwed on tight, because it could be a barn burner. I would not have said this before the season. I did look at the schedule, went down it, and automatically chalked up a W in the column for Auburn. I don't know. Auburn is a -15, maybe. The series history, Auburn leads 28-21-3. The last game being played in 2013, one of the better Auburn-Tennessee games that I ever attended. It was in Knoxville back in 2013. Auburn winning 55-13 and going on to play for the national championship against the Florida State Seminoles. And Auburn had their way with Butch Jones in Tennessee that afternoon, returning back kicks, returning back punts. Nick Marshall going crazy, Trey Mason, everybody. Huge win back in a 32-point margin. Maybe the largest in series history. Let me see here. Okay, let's go on. Well, that brings us to that point. The largest margin in series history, the largest margin of victory was 38-6 in 1988. And I am wrong on the score. That was the largest margin of victory, 38-6, a 32-point margin of victory in 1988. The 2013 score was Auburn 55 and Tennessee 23, a 22-point margin of victory. I was incorrect. It was not 13, it was 23 for the Vols. And the largest margin of victory for the Tennessee Volunteers came in 1980. Auburn's newly expanded stadium to host 87,000. It was packed. Doug Barfield's last year. Auburn had not barely begun the season with a real shaky win over TCU in Fort Worth. Tennessee actually comes in and slaughters Auburn 42-0 in 1980. It was utterly miserable. One of the worst 2 or 3 games, embarrassments in Auburn history, I think. Much less just the series history with Tennessee. The longest winning streaks, Auburn had a 6-game winning streak between the years 2003 and 2013, that last time they played, and the Vols won 4 games in the series between the years 1991 and 1999. Another exciting game, big victory for Auburn, was a 24-point margin of victory for Auburn in 2004, that year that they did go undefeated and won the Southeastern Conference. Should have played for the national championship. Dominated Tennessee. They were leading 31-3 at the halftime. Most people remember Ronnie Brown running over I forget who into the Tennessee end zone. The Tennessee fans were gone by halftime. And I did not attend that one. I did watch it on television, but it was a great one. And, of course, Tommy Tuberville and many other coaches said Auburn had enough points and they didn't score anymore. I bet they wish they should have gone ahead and scored 50 against Tennessee, because when you're playing for that BCS title and they say that, games like this, style points don't matter, shouldn't matter, well, they dang sure do. And if Auburn had really put the throttle to Arkansas and Kentucky and Tennessee and others in 2004, it couldn't have helped. It couldn't have hurt. It couldn't have hurt when the BCS final decision was made in 2004. But blah, blah, blah. It's not sour grapes. It's just what would have been, what could have been. But let's look for today. And today, Tennessee coming in on Saturday with a 15-point underdog, and the Vols are going to be snarling. So what's going to happen? Well, I do think Auburn will do enough to win. By 15, again, another one I would not touch. How are the Tigers going to get 15 points, much less win by 15? So don't touch that one. But Auburn to win, it could be anywhere from 3 points to 21. It really could. I wouldn't even chance a score, seeing how things have gone for the Tigers this year. But I do expect them to pull it back together. And on this noon kickoff on ESPN, expect the Tigers to come away with a victory and possibly springboard them to a victory next week in Oxford, and hopefully one on November 3rd against A&M. But that's looking too far into the future. Focus on Saturday, win Saturday, and you got a little springboard. You got some confidence. There were some things that happened in the second half to give Auburn some confidence that they can move the football, as they did move it for 225 yards against Mississippi State in Starkville. So we'll see. That's all we can say about any of them. And I'm so glad that you have been with us again, all 3 of you. Whoever's listening out there, thank you. I enjoy doing this. I hope you enjoy listening. I do love to talk SEC football, and in particular, Auburn football. The absolute best of luck to your team, whether it's the Tennessee Volunteers or the Missouri Tigers, the LSU Tigers, the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Good luck, SEC teams. To your favorite out there, fans. I hope it's going to be a great weekend for you. There are some interesting matchups on the schedule this week. So, once again, you can find me, Bird LaCroix, your host for the SEC yesterday and today. This has been episode 20. I am on Twitter at Autull, Autull. My email is birdlacroix@yahoo.com, and you can find my columns, my writing, and my podcast on sportshacks.com. You can also find these sports hacks on iTunes, Apple, LinkedIn. Is that one on there? Stitcher, whatever. There's many places you can find it. If I were you, I would go to iTunes and subscribe to this podcast, and it'll drop to you every week. And you can enjoy listening to it. It comes in at under 30 minutes most every time. I'm going solo again. I've enjoyed that. My wife has encouraged me to do it this way. She's a fair critic of mine and says it's getting better. I hope it is. And again, I hope you enjoy it. Be sure to stay safe out there and love your neighbor.